So the poll last week was about the congestion pricing. And so the poll was, are increased toll prices going to make you personally drive less? Because we've seen with the congestion pricing that some of these fees are going to go up. But some are saying $23 for rush hour trip, $17 in off-peak hour trips. And in some estimates that this congestion pricing plan will increase commuters' expenses by $5,000 to $6,000 per year. So that's not insignificant at all, especially in a city that, as we learned previously in a poll, showed that 50% are unable to meet their basic needs.
Absolutely.
So in this poll, we had 30% said yes, that it was going to make them drive less, and 70% said no.
Okay.
So
that's significant, right? Because of those 70%, you don't know how many really don't have a choice or feel like they don't have a choice.
Right. So we had a bunch of different, and I think that was part of it. Some people said, one person said, if the toll increases aren't making people decide to drive less in NYC, they haven't increased the tolls enough. That sucks. That brings a whole nother discussion in. Then it means only rich people would be able to afford to go around the city that they live in.
Right. And I think there's that disconnect that we've mentioned, I think, pretty often on here, that ideally, it would be great if we could all just take public transit everywhere, but we can't because our public transit system isn't where it needs to be. And so you can't have this conversation strictly about, well, let's make it harder for people to drive, because then what? You also have to include giving us better train service, better buses, better network. That's not being talked about, though, enough in this discussion. It's only about the tolls and punishing drivers. But what is the alternative? Where is it? Right? Again, we've mentioned this. You showed us the stick. Where's the carrot?
Absolutely. Come on, give us the answer, Rico. So another response here was someone who lived in New York saying only a masochist would drive in Manhattan if they didn't absolutely have to. This person,
and yet there is traffic now. Of course, it used to be yellow cabs primarily. Now you see mostly Uber drivers. If you go into Manhattan, you'll see the TC plates. So you know that they're Ubers or Lyfts or what have you. But there is still a lot of traffic in Manhattan. And why is that? Is everyone a masochist? Do people feel like they have no choice? I mean, what's going on there?
His opinion comes from he used to be a cab driver in New York City.
So he's suffering from PTSD.
He probably is. So there've been some pretty good discussion in the comments here. People are basically talking about the traffic in Manhattan, and basically, I guess, how it's always been pretty congested. Someone's talking about back in 1972 and the 1960s. Basically, I guess no one wants to drive in Manhattan.
Yeah, you know what? I always heard that myself growing up. I personally never minded driving in Manhattan. It was parking in Manhattan that I didn't like, because it's so hard to find a parking spot. And if you put it in the garage, the prices are astronomical. We don't know that game. But driving in it, I don't know. I like driving. It never really bothered me. You get more traffic on the Bell Parkway a lot. I mean, driving in Manhattan, it's not that big of a deal.
Now, one comment here kind of, I guess, is in favor more of or sees the rail system as a better option. He says there's a metric crap ton of rail service in NYC, and the 5 boroughs are blanketed with subway service. The idea that one simply must drive into Manhattan seems, in most cases, rather bonkers. How many people truly need to do that?
People do. I mean, forget about Manhattan for a second. What about intra-borough travel? What about getting around Queens?
Right.
But then there's also the idea, okay, you're going from South Queens, let's say, to Manhattan. I think you said this last week or whenever we last mentioned it. The mass transit system in the city was really designed to get you into Manhattan and really into Manhattan specifically, right? And even trying to take a direct route from South Queens to Midtown. You got to go through Brooklyn. You got to get through downtown. You got to go all the way up. I mean, that's not a good look. That's not a direct route, and that's not efficient, right? And so, I mean, you could look at Midtown Manhattan. You could look at certain routes and say that the infrastructure is there. But overall, I mean, you start looking at the outer boroughs and a lot of parts of the city, we're really not as connected as we need to be.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There's another one here that has a good point. It said tolls are one of the most regressive taxes out there, since for the poor people, they are a much bigger chunk of their income, but also since poorer people are more likely to have to live further away from urban work because of housing affordability. So it's a good point. It impacts the poor folks more than anyone else.
Right. Yeah, and if you are privileged enough and doing well enough to live in great, built up, developed parts of Manhattan, great. You probably don't need a car, right? Even though you can maybe you can afford one more than some other folks, you don't need it because you've got all the subway lines you can think of, all the bus service that you need. You're good. You could probably walk to where you need to go. A lot of people who live in those urban centers in Manhattan say, this is a joke. Like, you live downtown. I would never go up past 14th Street because everything that they need is right in front of them downtown Manhattan, or in certain areas. But when you go, again, look at Howard Beach, look at the Rockaways, look at certain places, right? Staten Island, parts of Brooklyn. But a lot of the city, isn't just downtown Manhattan or midtown Manhattan or downtown Brooklyn or Bed-Stuy or where these gentrified areas are.
Right.
I think a lot of people only consider New York that because that's their experience. That's all that they know. Right. But the city is much bigger than that, and everyone else is being left out. Right.
Absolutely. And so this also, someone also brought up in here on the point, I'm not going to read it, it's kind of a longer comment, but he brought up the point that basically, I guess people don't realize that the rest of the boroughs, you basically have to go through Manhattan to leave New York City. If you're in Queens, if you're in Brooklyn, if you're in Long Island, you can't leave New York unless you go through Manhattan and incur these types of tolls.
You mean on mass transit?
If you're driving.
Well, no, you can take the Verrazano Bridge.
Yeah, but you still got to go through. You still got to take a toll to go through.
Oh, toll.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think you have to go through Manhattan.
For a lot of things, you need to drive through to go. Like if you're, where's this comment here? You need to drive through Manhattan and incur the increased pricing, but you'll need to drive through the Bronx or Staten and pay the toll both ways. Staten Island and Jersey tolls are one way. It goes on about all the different tolls here, but it's an integral part of travel in and out of New York City.
That's a good point too, right? If you're going to leave New York City.
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm taking a trip to Virginia. Do I have to take Amtrak? That's very expensive too. I mean, you're probably going to drive if you're going long distance.
If you can. Some people, if they can, yeah. So
and there's obviously a lot of gas money, but also high tolls.
Right. And one thing we didn't bring up, and when we were talking about this before, and as I was looking through some other articles here, they brought up that I guess one of the criticisms was like this toll pricing, this congestion pricing was one of the things it was billed to do was to deal with climate change, to bring down the congestion in Manhattan, to bring down the traffic. But apparently there was, the MTA cut something. What is it? I forget what it was. They cut something about a year or two ago that actually increased traffic in Manhattan by 15%. So like this seems like it's more of a money grab than it is an actual earnest effort to fight climate change.
Right.
And I have to look up what it is.
When you look at the fact that they're not replacing it with better options.
Right.